In this story, I will tell you how my inimitable, beautiful wife cheated on me with 3 men at once. I made the big mistake of giving her half of my life. Sit back, it's gonna be a long story. It all started years ago. In my sophomore year of college, I was what you might call a typical nerd, completely immersed in math and completely disconnected from everything to do with social life. The quiet corners of the library became my sanctuary where I could escape the hustle and bustle of campus and delve into equations and theories. Although I wasn't completely unattractive, I convinced myself that focusing on my studies left no room for romance in my life. One night, I reluctantly agreed to go to a party. I sat alone, drinking beer, and felt completely out of place. It was then that Jessica, the campus beauty and my secret crush, unexpectedly approached me. She was incredibly attractive, always the center of attention, and yet she decided to strike up a conversation with me. We quickly found a common language and soon became inseparable. After graduation, we got married. "Oh, Mark, you're still great at everything," Jessica said, a smile lighting up her face. Her words, though pleasant, left me feeling uneasy. Why, after almost 30 years of marriage, was she comparing me to other men? The thought hit me like a bolt from the blue, making me choke with anxiety. We were in an intimate moment, but her remark knocked me out of my rut. "My darling, you really know how to turn my world upside down," she added, as I lay with my head on her thigh, completely still. She looked at me, confused, and asked, "Aren't you going to continue?" "No, I'm exhausted, darling. You have drained me of all my strength," I answered. She kissed me lightly and lay down again. Normally we would cuddle before cleaning up, but Jessica fell asleep almost immediately. I quietly slipped out of bed, cleaned the bathroom, and then went downstairs to get a drink. Having an above-average IQ is not always an advantage. Most guys probably wouldn't have paid attention to Jessica's comment, but it stuck with me. As I sipped my glass of stale, I began to review every detail of our marriage, looking for signs of trouble, but I didn't remember anything suspicious. Our sex life even improved after our youngest son left for college 6 months ago. Jessica has lost 20 pounds, returning to her college weight of 120 pounds. At 51, her body was still an eye-catcher, a goddess with perfect curves and long legs. Age had not robbed her of her beauty, which she had certainly inherited from her mother. We met in college, dated for a few years, and got married when we were only 22. Jessica was always a little flirtatious, but it didn't bother me before. I knew she believed her looks could charm any man. But now, for the first time, it made me wonder. Her beauty had always been an eye-catcher, and I recalled an incident at her work when her appearance interrupted a conversation, leaving a mixture of annoyance and judgment in the eyes of others. Ever since she turned 14, Jessica has been a stunner wherever she goes. Even with an extra 20 pounds, she still looked incredible at 51. Jessica considered Rhonda, a 26-year-old coworker, to be her friend, but remarked Jessica perceived as inappropriate. There was also Carl, a new agent in their office, who was extremely handsome at 6 feet 4 inches with an athletic build. Jessica noted his appearance, but mentally reminded herself that she was happily married. Instead of joining the girls for lunch, Jessica decided to skip it and went to the gym near her office to sign up for a membership. "Miss Cheesecake will pay for her tactlessness," she thought as she drove away. As I sat in my office with my third drink, I was taken back to the moment when Jessica and I first met at a university in the Midwest. I was the nerd who spent as much time in the gym as I did studying, but Jessica was like a goddess among mortals, and goddesses don't date nerds. I knew about her, but I never dared to approach her, watching from afar as guys always hovered around her, vying for her attention at parties and on campus. I admired her from afar, never daring to speak to her in the crowd of attractive admirers. But just a few weeks later, at another party, I was sitting alone again, sipping my beer, when someone interrupted my thoughts by sitting down next to me. To my surprise, it was the girl of my dreams, So are you into boys or girls? She suddenly asked. It's okay, really, I don't mind, but every straight guy tries to talk to me, but you don't. What's the matter? I blushed, stuttering, completely confused by her presence. She was even more beautiful up close, and I felt my body react to it. So that's how it is, she said, noticing my embarrassment. No, I finally managed to say, I'm straight. I just didn't think a girl like you would have time for someone like me. With so many guys around, I replied, well, you know, sweetie, women sometimes like their men to be a little mysterious. She smiled, her eyes casually playful. We left the party together, and after graduation we got married almost immediately. I always knew that Jessica was several social levels above me, but I also knew how to make her happy in bed. That first night, I turned her into a woman trembling with passion, and even after all these years, I could do it again, although her interest had been waning lately. But tonight was different. Jessica and I hadn't been intimate in 2 weeks, the longest break since we had children. She always made excuses — she was tired, or not in the mood. In the end, I just stopped trying. While she was washing a pot in the sink, I came up behind her and grabbed her breasts. She tried to push me away, but I was persistent, and eventually we ended up in our bedroom. I quickly undressed her. Usually, she screamed with passion, but this time, for the first time in 29 years, she spoke during our intimacy. Our passionate merger was enjoyable, but her comments about my skills brought me back to reality. 2 weeks after the locker room incident, Jessica began her mission to seduce Carl Walters. They were working together on the same deal, and it gave her the perfect opportunity to ask him out to dinner. Everything looked professional. Just like the times she had invited other agents to discuss work, because she was the senior agent and lead producer. But this time, she made sure Rhonda knew about the dinner. At first, Jessica took care of business. Work is work, after all. When all business matters were taken care of, she put her charm to work. Over dinner and wine, she learned all about Carl's days on the soccer field and his personal life. He mentioned a girlfriend, but added that they were not in a serious relationship. Jessica often touched his arm and wrist, her jacket casually unbuttoned, revealing a tight white top as she leaned closer. She noticed Carl's reaction and thought for sure he was already hooked. Men are so predictable, she thought. He's mine, but he doesn't realize it yet. Just wait until I lose another 5 pounds, then he'll get his reward. The private investigator I hired turned out to be worth every cent I had planned to spend on the trip to Hawaii. His report revealed that Jessica was having regular sex with Carl Walters, a man named Fred Lazar, as well as her gym trainer. The detective looked worried as he relayed the details to me, making me wonder if he was also involved in an affair with my unfaithful wife. Although I am not a complete nerd, I have developed a diverse circle of friends over the years. One of my oldest and closest friends is a lawyer named Martin Bolin. Like me, Marty was a smart, somewhat technical guy, but if I ever needed legal help, Marty would be there without hesitation. He may not be the type to break pencils in half, but he has a reputation as a ruthless advocate in court. We both agreed that Jessica should face the consequences of her betrayal. Since we didn't live in a no-fault divorce state, why let her hide behind the excuse of a misunderstanding? Jessica had originally planned to sleep with Fred Lazar only once. He was Rhonda's fiancé who had hurt her, and Jessica wanted to show Rhonda what a real woman's body looks like. By keeping it a secret from Rhonda, Jessica relished the thought that she would be laughing at her for years. However, Fred's 9 inches and his skills in bed quickly changed her mind. She decided to enjoy him more than once more, finding excuses to use him instead of Carl or to avoid time with me. Darren Trimble as a lover was not part of her plan. Darren was her trainer at the gym, and his muscular physique had caught Jessica's eye during one of her personal training sessions. When he put his hands on her shoulders, it lit a spark. She clung to him, and soon they were in his apartment, ripping each other's clothes off in a frenzy of passion. Jessica returned home from Darren's 30 minutes later, still in her gym clothes. I came in about 5 minutes after her. She quickly showered and started preparing dinner, acting as if nothing had happened. Knowing she had a trainer and noticing her newly toned figure, I just assumed she had a long workout. She looked nervous and avoided our usual greeting, mumbling something about needing to wash off her sweat. Her excuse might have worked if I hadn't seen the private investigator's report. Despite my anger, I remained calm that evening. While Jessica was putting away the dishes and I was watching TV, the doorbell rang. She called me to check, but I saw that it was a process server. I asked her to answer it. She laughed, but soon came into the living room holding a manila envelope. "What the hell?" she hissed, looking at the open envelope. "How could you do this? What about our family?" "You're just angry that I beat you to it," I replied calmly. "You would have done this to me eventually. You don't love me anymore." "I know about your cheating." My voice trembled a little as I said it. Jessica's face changed from shock to anger. "You think you know something? Go ahead and say it, I'm all ears." "Carl Walters. Fred Lazar." I paused and pulled out a small piece of paper. "Darren Trimble." Jessica looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. She sat up, realizing that I had more than just suspicions. "If you were braver, we wouldn't be having this conversation," she said with a venomous tone. I sighed, feeling the deep pain of betrayal. It turns out that 29 years of marriage was not enough to keep her faithful. None of these men were even born when we got married. Her eyebrows rose as she realized I knew more than she thought. She looked like she was about to argue, but then stopped. "I'll let you stay in the house until we sell it. You can explain everything to the children and your parents," I said quietly. I stood up, took 2 packed suitcases from the hall closet and headed for the door. She clearly wasn't expecting it. Yes, Judy was beautiful, and I could appreciate her fantastic body, but I never lusted after other women when I was married. First of all, I was married, and secondly, why would I even think about another woman when I was already married to a goddess? I had long since left the dating game, and it was definitely showing. I don't think my complexion returned to normal until the end of our meeting, but I tried to remain calm and restrained. I think I managed to keep the conversation on track. We shared a piece of cheesecake and each had a cup of coffee for dessert. Then Judy looked me straight in the eye and said, "I think we should go back to my place for a real nightcap. If I'm not mistaken, you haven't been with anyone since you left Jessica. I'd like to be your first since the Queen." It may sound silly, but I was really nervous about getting close to Judy. A lot of time had passed, and I knew I wouldn't last long, and then I would need time to recover. After all, I'm not 21 anymore. Also, since Judy was a friend of Jessica's as well as mine, I was worried about the possibility of everyone finding out about my flaws. I could imagine how people might think Dr. Marklin Robertson, a brilliant professor of computational physics at the university, loses in bed. I could see how they might think Jessica was right to leave me if I was a failure at what really mattered. When we reached her house, Judy made us coffee and then excused herself to change into something more comfortable. My head was already spinning when she returned. Judy was wearing something that looked like a terry cloth robe, more like a short dress with straps that barely reached mid-thigh. Her breasts were clearly visible through the thin fabric, showing that she had removed her bra. I was more than a little interested. We sat down on the couch, drank coffee, and talked innocently. I tried not to let my thoughts get away from me. "Mark, wake up, Mark," I heard Judy's voice in my head. Oh my God, I must be drooling, I thought. Judy gently took the cup of coffee from my hands, placed it on the table, and quietly led me to her bedroom. I almost didn't realize she was slowly undressing me completely. "Careful, don't rush," I whispered as my brain finally started to work. "It's been a long time, and I'm not ready for this to be over so quickly." "Relax, Mark, I understand," Judy replied with a smile. "We can do this again. I'm patient." But not that patient, I said as I helped her take off her robe. To say it went well was an understatement. Do you really have to be that irresistible? Judy asked me half jokingly as we lay next to each other, looking into each other's eyes. Well, yeah, that's what I'm here for, isn't it? I replied, trying to sound confident. A little pause. I would like to ask you to hit a like on the video. It might help to develop my channel. Thank you. Let's continue. Oh my God, Mark, Judy said as she moved closer to me and then turned her back so I could put my arms around her. We fell asleep, and I slept soundly for several hours before waking up to the wonderful feeling of Judy's body pressed against mine. Good morning, Sonia, she said playfully. Good morning to you too, I replied happily. You're gorgeous, my love, she said, looking me straight in the eye. A month later, Jessica met Judy for lunch at one of their favorite places. Jessica had called and invited Judy herself, fully aware that the lunch would be about her time with Jessica's ex-husband. Judy had already met Mark several times, so she knew that the call was not a coincidence. They spent the first 10 minutes catching up on the latest news and talking about the kids before Jessica finally touched on what was really on her mind. You've been dating a lot, Judy? Really? I thought you weren't into sports anymore, Jessica said as she sipped her margarita with a catty grin. Judy blushed as Jessica spoke. Although she had expected this conversation, it felt more uncomfortable than she could have anticipated. What she had initially seen as a one-time fling to satisfy her curiosity had turned into something much more personal. Mark Robertson gave Judy unforgettable moments. This man really is a master in bed, Judy thought. Is he always this good? She asked enthusiastically. Like a teenager with a first crush. Jessica was confused by Judy's praise for her ex-husband. She assumed that Mark would not work as hard with his mistress as he did with his wife. Judy's reaction confirmed that Mark had indeed turned her world upside down. How could you let that man walk out of your life? Are you out of your mind, sister? He's smart, handsome, gentle, and a real charmer, Judy exclaimed. Jessica's smile disappeared instantly. She took a quick gulp of her margarita, raised her eyebrows, and changed the subject. Judy noticed that her praise of Mark was not what Jessica expected, so she let her change the direction of the conversation. Meanwhile, in my world, Molly Hamilton was snuggled up against my right side, her hand on my chest, breathing steadily in her sleep. We had just completed an intense love-making session, though perhaps it was more about passion than love, and I was completely exhausted. I felt sticky, a little guilty, but also like $1 million. If I live to be 100, I will never fully understand women. My ex-wife had cheated on me, claiming I couldn't satisfy her physically, but here I was, having possibly the best sex of my life with the third woman in the last 3 months. No part of it made sense. Molly works as a physician's assistant at an orthopedic clinic. It may sound cliché, but I met her at the gym. She was working out hard on the machines, sweat streaming down her face, accentuating her tight-fitting sportswear. Normally, I would have looked at a pretty girl and moved on, but something about this woman caught my attention. She came to work out, not to find a partner, and that's what hooked me. I waited until she finished her workout and went to the locker room before cautiously approaching her. I hadn't dated many women since my divorce, despite the interest many had shown, but something about her dedication to training caught my attention. I introduced myself and asked if I could take her out for coffee and dessert one evening. She hesitated for a moment, then agreed, entering her name and number into my phone. We smiled at each other and I admired her as she walked away. Before she left the gym, I called her. I know this may sound desperate, but now is the best time to ask. How about Thursday night? I asked. She turned, looked at me through the glass door, and smiled broadly. My heart may have skipped a beat. Okay, Thursday night. I'll meet you at Lou's at 7, she said into the phone. Sure enough, the rest of my workout that evening went great, nothing hurt. On Thursday night, I arrived at Lou's at 6:50, found a small table in the far corner, and ordered a cheesecake. Less than 2 minutes later, Molly walked in, her long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Wearing tight jean shorts and a t-shirt that didn't quite reach the top of her shorts. She was clearly showing off the results of her workouts at the gym, and I couldn't blame her, they were really impressive. Her breasts were a little small, but it fit the rest of her body perfectly. Besides, if she was bigger, she would have attracted too much attention, especially because she wasn't wearing a bra, which was easy to see when she came up to me. I was sitting at a high table, so Molly had to jump up to sit on the chair while I held it for her, and her braless breasts bounced a little when she sat down. She noticed me looking at this movement, and raised an eyebrow, and I smiled and nodded in response. We spent 2 hours eating cheesecake, drinking coffee, and talking. I was completely mesmerized by this woman who was not much older than my daughter. I wasn't sure if she was as interested in me, but she agreed to go with me again the following Saturday. We visited a vintage car museum, and then went to a restaurant to have a bite to eat. Then we went back to my place, and as they say, the rest is history. Clearly, this old man still has something in his arsenal. While I was falling asleep at one end of town, Tracy was enjoying some passion with a much younger guy she had met earlier that evening. However, she didn't have as much fun as she had hoped. Wasn't this supposed to be more fun? She wondered as she got into her car to drive home. She took a quick glance in the rearview mirror, and although she liked what she saw, something was definitely wrong. Carl had dumped her a month ago, saying he wanted to start dating someone who was looking for marriage and children, 2 things Tracy couldn't give him. Carl was right, and he was kind in this breakup, but the moment Tracy realized she had been dumped for the 2nd time in a row. First Mark, now Carl. Tracy could justify Carl's departure by telling herself that the spark between them was fading. Their intimacy had become routine, and sometimes she caught herself thinking that she was no longer interested. But somewhere deep in her subconscious, Tracy couldn't shake the thought, this shouldn't be happening to someone like me. As she pulled into her driveway, she told herself that next time, maybe she should look for someone closer to her own age. They might not be as hot as younger guys, but at least she might be interested in talking to them. Spending time with Molly only made me realize what I always believed about Tracy. Even before I met Tracy, with my limited experience, I always felt like she wasn't as good in bed as others I've been with. And I really believed it was because she thought she was a goddess. Women, like Tracy, don't have to try hard to attract men, and that's probably why they don't put much effort into making things exciting in bed. At first, this is not necessary. Guys get pleasure just from being next to a beautiful woman with curves. But over time, this excitement fades, especially if the woman is selfish and doesn't make an effort. Over the years, Tracy and I discussed this several times in a mild way, but I was never able to tell her directly that she just wasn't that great in bed. I went along with it because I loved her. But Judy, Katie, and now Molly have shown me what great intimacy can really be like. As I lay in bed and started to fall asleep, I thought, Tracy has been fooling me all these years. 2 weeks later, I picked up the phone and was a little surprised and a little suspicious to hear Tracy's voice on the other end. We hadn't spoken in months, and when I was with my daughters, they didn't mention her because they knew I wouldn't want to talk about it. I made it very clear to my daughters that while I want them to love and respect their mother, my relationship with her is over and they should respect that. So far, they have been good at keeping the peace. Mark, April wants to know if we can be civil at her wedding. Robert finally proposed, and she wants us both to be there as long as we don't act like enemies. I haven't heard from April yet, but you can assure her that I'll be a perfect gentleman. I will remind her that you were the woman I once loved when she calls to share this good news. April called the next day to tell me about the big event, and I told her the same thing I had told her mother. She mentioned that Tracy would be helping with the planning of the event, and I encouraged her to enjoy the moment to the fullest, assuring her that I would cover all expenses. I'm not usually emotional, but as I walked down the aisle with April, I was overwhelmed with emotion. My little girl, who once loved dolls, silly songs, and toys, had grown into a beautiful woman, both inside and out. The walk down the aisle took only a few minutes, but during those 30 steps, many memories flashed through my mind. As I handed her over to Robert at the altar, tears of joy rolled down my cheeks. I joined our family and stood next to Tracy, who leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. She was crying too. We danced a waltz for the father-daughter dance, and I think it went well. Then Robert and his mother, Isabel, danced a foxtrot. After that, the music switched to more modern tunes, and the dance floor quickly filled with guests in their 20s and 30s. I lingered at the bar for about 10 minutes, slowly sipping a single malt scotch, before deciding to make my move. Tracy was on the dance floor with one of the young men, doing a slow dance, when I approached and asked if I could intervene. The young man looked a little embarrassed, but Tracy flashed a smile and held out her hand to me, making the choice for him. "You don't trust me with these kids?" Tracy joked, looking at me sideways. "Thanks to you, half the guests think I'm a flirt." That young man you just sent away was clinging to me, hoping he'd be lucky enough to go home with the mother of the bride. "If that's what you want, I can bring him back," I replied with a smile. "But I thought you'd prefer to talk and dance with someone who doesn't idolize Beyoncé." "Touché," she said with a smile. "Well, unless you plan on punching me on the dance floor, I think we've had a great time this weekend." I'd have to agree, but for a moment I thought April might have a panic attack when you walked up to me. Tracy laughed. "We haven't exactly been model adults to each other lately," I admitted. "But at least we waited until the kids were out of the house before things blew up." "That's true," she replied. We danced to a few slow songs before the music sped up. Her previous dance partner returned and politely asked if he could cut in. Tracy looked a little surprised when I agreed. Ellie joined me at our table, watching her mother on the dance floor, keeping her eyes on her. "Do you think I'll have to worry about men harassing her in the nursing home?" asked Ellie half-jokingly. I gave my daughter a sideways glance, not wanting her to notice how I was sizing up her reaction. Her tone was light, but her eyes read something else. "What about you, Dad? Mom says you go out sometimes, but it seems impossible to replace her." "I'm fine actually, better than fine," I replied. "Your mom doesn't know as much about my current life as she thinks she does. But let's just say, I don't have a problem with female attention, and I'm not trying to replace it. I'll deal with it when and if I want to." It was at this point that Wendy Adams, an old family friend, came to our table. Wendy and her late husband Earl had been friends with Tracy and me since our children were young. Earl died of cancer a few years ago, and I know that Wendy and Tracy still keep in touch. I don't see Wendy often, because Earl and I were best friends. Wendy was a few years younger than me, and it was clear from the way her dress fit that she had kept herself in good shape. I invited her to join Ellie and me at the table, but she just smiled and asked Ellie if we could excuse us while we went to the dance floor. Ellie looked a little surprised at first, but then kindly told us to go and have fun. As Wendy and I headed to the dance floor, Ellie grabbed my hand and leaned in to whisper, "Coincidences like this only happen in the movies, Daddy." We danced to a few songs and then went to the bar and settled into comfortable chairs outside the room. We talked for a while, and then Wendy took my hand, looked me seriously in the eye, and asked me the million-dollar question, "Do you still love her, Mark? Because if you do, I don't want to make a fool of myself by inviting you to dinner." I didn't expect that. I had always thought Wendy was pretty close to Tracy, so I hadn't even considered asking her out, even though she was always very attractive. I always thought Earl was lucky to have her. I must admit I was a little surprised that she wasn't picked up immediately. After the appropriate period of mourning, I will always love her to some extent, despite what she did to me. Maybe it's like a bad habit, but I'm not in love with her anymore. "I don't love her with all my heart and soul," I answered. "But you and her. I don't want to create problems between you." I had forgotten one of Wendy's best qualities, her straightforwardness. She quickly reminded me of this. "Mark, I'm not a girl anymore, and I've been alone for 8 years. There aren't many men I'm interested in, so I'm not going to lose someone who's right here. Tracy let you go. It's been 3 years since your divorce became official? And I know you're dating. You're like the first draft pick in a fantasy men's league if we had one. So, no, I'm not losing a minute of sleep worrying about what Tracy thinks about you and me and other things. She blushed a little when she said the last part. Suddenly, I realized that I really wanted to be the one to help Wendy get back in the saddle, so to speak. I handed her my phone and she entered her number. As soon as I handed the phone back, April and Robert came out of the room looking for me. April knew who Wendy was, and they talked for a bit before Wendy said I needed to come back and play the role of father of the bride again. I walked over to her, took both of her hands in mine, leaned down and gave her a quick kiss on the lips. We'll continue later, I said quietly as Wendy blushed slightly. We did all the usual things at a wedding, including cutting the cake, and Tracy was glued to me most of the evening. I think April might have remembered our conversation with Wendy, and I assumed that Tracy's behavior was caused by a little jealousy. I have to admit, it amused me a little, even though 3 years had passed. When April and Robert returned to the room, April went up to Tracy and told her that they had just seen me and Wendy Adams having a close conversation. She mentioned that we kissed as we left. Allison also told Tracy that she had watched Wendy and I on the dance floor and that Wendy looked like a teenager in love. Allison thought that was cute, but judging by the look on Tracy's face, she didn't share that feeling. After I made sure everything was done for the rest of the evening, Tracy and I were left alone in the hotel lobby. I knew she had come by taxi, so I offered to give her a ride home. She agreed, but on the condition that I let her buy me a drink at the hotel bar. Given that Tracy and I hadn't had such a good relationship in years, I agreed, and we walked down the hall to sit at a low table at the bar. The lady will have a bourbon on the rocks, and I'll just have a stale, I told the waitress when she asked about our order. It's nice that you still remember, Tracy said. You're still the only woman I've ever known who knows how to drink whiskey properly, I replied. You're going to have a good time with Wendy Adams? She suddenly blurted out, quickly covering her cheek with her hand and blushing as she realized what she had said. I'm sorry about that, I didn't mean it to sound like that, she stammered. I meant, are you going to date her? You've gone out with a lot of beautiful women in the last few years. I don't think you even miss me. Was this your plan to make me jealous so you could have fun? I lowered my glass and looked directly into her blue eyes. She met my gaze, her eyes almost shining with intensity. There was a silence between us that lasted about 15 seconds while I carefully formulated my answer. That's a nice try, Tracy, but I seem to remember someone else having fun while we were still married. To this day, you still haven't explained why you treated me so disrespectfully when I would have been perfectly happy to grow old with you. Will this proposal discussion still continue? She interrupted, taking me completely by surprise. To say I was stunned is an understatement. My jaw literally dropped as I stared at her. Okay, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, an incredibly stupid mistake, Tracy sighed. I was afraid of getting old, so I got carried away with having great sex with a young guy to prove to myself that I could still attract men like I used to. But in reality, it was no different from a normal physical act. It was just the thrill of a new man. A young man who was lusting after me. I wasn't smart enough to realize it at the time. When I started comparing them to you, well, you didn't seem good enough compared to what those guys could do. And because you were such a sweet, innocent guy while I was having fun, I thought you were just a self-righteous smartass. But I was wrong. After you left, the excitement of the game disappeared, and after a while, the excitement of the new man, or rather, people, disappeared. It was still nice for the ego, having a young guy half my age, but emotionally, nothing was happening. Damn it, Mark, I would have given anything for a hug after good sex. Have you ever thought about dating someone your own age? Someone who is on your level and understands life, even if he can't hit The high notes like those guys. After all, Tracy, no matter how good you look, you're not 22 years old either, I said. Can you forgive my mistake and be mine again, please? Tracy's eyes filled with tears. Before all this, I would have hugged her and tried to make things right for her. Even now, after everything that had happened, part of me still wanted to do just that. But in the end, it wasn't the victory it could have been 3 years ago. Now it looked more like a desperate apology. I shook my head slowly. First of all, we had about 29 good years together. I wouldn't say this. Last year has been good. But this is real life, Tracy, and in real life, we're not going to make it, I said softly. Come on, I'll take you home. Wendy Adams abruptly ended what had turned out to be a pretty good second bachelorhood for me. I waited a week after the wedding before calling her. We went to a nice seafood restaurant a few towns away. She was wearing a tight dress and men were staring at her all night, but unlike Tracy, she didn't seem to notice the attention. Her attention was completely focused on me. After a great dinner and conversation, we went back to her house for after-dinner drinks and dessert. She poured us both a glass of cognac, which we leisurely drank in about 5 minutes. Then it was time for dessert. Wendy stood up, took my hand, and led me to a bedroom on the second floor. I noticed that it was not the master bedroom and that it seemed to be rarely used. I completely understood her reluctance to be intimate in the bed she shared with Earl. Wendy didn't need to tell me to be gentle with her. I knew she probably hadn't been with many men, if any, since Earl's death. I knew they were deeply in love. I was very gentle and slow, starting with soft kisses on her lips while I helped her take off her clothes. Then she started, helping me take mine off as I kissed her bare shoulders, then her upper chest. Her beautiful, full breasts still had life in them. Standing proudly, tenderness gave way to a passion I hadn't even expected from this woman. When I finally raised my head, she barely whispered enough. We kissed some more, and then just lay there, entwined with each other, until I heard her breathing slow as she drifted off to sleep. She looked like an angel, and I must have watched her sleep for a good 10 minutes. Over the past 3 years since my divorce, I have experienced an incredible sexual renaissance and have enjoyed women of all ages. However, there was something different about this relationship. Yes, I was satisfied on a physical level, but it seemed like I had an emotional attachment with Wendy. As I fell asleep in one of the best dreams of my life, I began to wonder if she felt the same way. Although waking up in someone else's bed was no longer unusual for me, this morning it felt different. It was almost like waking up lazily on a Sunday in the good old days, when Tracy was in the kitchen making breakfast and the girls were running around playing their games. But there was no Tracy here, no laughter from the kids, just Wendy, who, if my nose was right, was frying bacon and already brewing a coffee drink. I pulled on a t-shirt and pants. I still hadn't found my shirt and wandered down the stairs without a care in the world. And there it was, my shirt. Wendy was wearing it and nothing else, with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows and the buttons half open. My shirt had never looked better. Hi, Sonia, I hope you don't mind me borrowing your shirt, she said, smiling. It just smells like you, and I wanted to leave that smell around for a little while longer. Well, what about breakfast? I asked. Can a hungry man get some attention? She slowly walked over to me, and I opened my arms, pulling her close. She smelled like us from last night, and I couldn't imagine a better scent in the whole world. I murmured. She replied. We ate breakfast and discussed our plans for the day. It was Saturday, so we had the whole day to do whatever we wanted. We weren't talking about what I was going to do or what she was going to do. We were discussing what we were going to do. We made several plans before I came up with the most brilliant idea of my life. This is going to sound completely stupid, but how about we get married today? I asked. You have a great IQ, she replied. I'll do whatever you want. It was so simple. I knew that the local justice of the peace worked on Saturdays, so I called to see if he was available for 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And just like that, everything was set. We had a little over 7 hours to get ready for our wedding. I needed a best man, and Wendy's 28-year-old son, Aaron, happily agreed when I explained that the bride was his mother. He said his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter would make the hour-long drive to attend. Wendy called her mother and asked her to be an honorary maid of honor. She had her phone on speakerphone, and my future mother-in-law, whom I had never met, burst into tears before she could squeeze out a yes. I then called both of my daughters and asked April, Robert, Allison, and whoever she would like to bring as a date. Do you think I should invite my mom as my guest? Allison asked a little cheekily. Only if you really want to, but to be honest, I'd rather you didn't, I replied. She's been going through a pretty rough time lately, and I don't want it to look like I'm rubbing my happiness in her face. One of my best friends owned a nice restaurant in town, so I quickly called him and asked if his banquet room was available for the day. He said he would be happy to provide it for me, so I booked the room right away. Then we both invited a few other close friends who we thought would like to celebrate this wonderful occasion with us. After that, I went to the best jewelry store in town to buy the rings. As fate would have it, Tracy was leaving her favorite boutique with several bags in hand when she almost literally bumped into Wendy on the sidewalk. Although they were no longer as close as they used to be, they had been friends for about 25 years. They chatted amicably for a few minutes before Tracy noticed the 2 wedding rings on Wendy's left hand. "Oh my God, girl, those rings are just stunning," Tracy exclaimed. Wendy blushed deeply, and something seemed to click in Tracy's head. You're married to Mark?" Tracy swayed, and Wendy thought she might faint. She quickly took her friend's shoulder to help her keep her balance. "I didn't know." "I'm so sorry," Tracy quickly apologized. "We haven't really talked about it. It all happened so fast." "Fast? That's definitely not the Mark I know," Tracy said, sounding surprised. "Did you ever feel like it was so right that you just had to do it?" continued Wendy. "I mean, who would let someone like that slip away?" Wendy immediately raised her hand to her lips. "That's not what I meant, Tracy. Honestly, I'm so sorry." "Yes, I understand, Wendy. It's okay, believe me," Tracy said, her voice softening. "I know I made a huge mistake. Learn from my mistakes and never let this man slip away. Surely there must be many good men out there, right?" Tracy's mind flashed back to her therapist, Dr. Ellen McForrest. "They seemed to be everywhere when I decided to leave Mark, and then they just disappeared," she said at the time. "You're a smart woman, Mrs. Robertson. You should have realized that there are very few good single men your age, but you didn't even try to find them, did you? Did you really believe you could catch a young, talented guy and keep him? You must have known that sooner or later you would have to not only have sex with him, but also talk to him and build a life with him." "God, Doctor, real life really sucks sometimes," Tracy sighed. "Fast forward 10 years, and here I am standing on the back porch of the house Wendy and I bought together shortly after we got married. For many reasons, we felt we needed a place of our own. It's a smaller house with only 2 bedrooms, but with a spacious living room and a large family room, so there's plenty of room when all 3 of our children and their families come to visit. We have already become grandparents 6 times. I'm grilling when Wendy comes out with a couple of glasses of whiskey on the rocks. She hands one to me and I give her a quick kiss on the lips. I can't help but admire how she looks 20 years younger than her 63 years. She still takes excellent care of herself, and although there are already a few gray strands in her light brown hair, she can still attract attention when she gets dressed up for one of our nights out on the town. Hey, we're getting old, but we're not dead yet. In fact, we still have fun in the bedroom twice a week and sometimes even in the shower. Modern medicine is a gift from the gods. Although I loved Tracy with all my heart when we were married, I just can't imagine life without Wendy. She won my heart in a way that Tracy never could. In a twisted way, I should be grateful that Tracy cheated on me because without that pain, I would never have experienced such happiness. I see Tracy every few months, and she hasn't looked good in a long time. There is always sadness in her eyes and she is constantly apologizing. I think about it often, but I'm too polite to ever say thank you out loud. At 65 years old, her once lush breasts are no longer held so high, but, thanks to a good bra, it is less noticeable. She's gained her cheesecake, but as she walks through the mall, she realizes that men no longer pay attention to her. As she walked to her car in the parking lot, she noticed me walking toward her. She quickly straightened up as I got closer. "Hello, beautiful," I said warmly, leaning down to kiss her on the cheek. Tracy couldn't help but blush at the compliment. We chatted for a few minutes, mostly about our shared grandchildren. Before I told her I had to go, she knew what was coming next. "Mark, I'm so sorry," Tracy said, as she always did. I looked directly into her eyes, paused for a moment, and then smiled, without saying a word. I got in my car and drove away, continuing to move forward with my life. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe and hit like. I appreciate you stay and listened it till the end. At this note I have to say goodbye to you and stay strong, be safe guys. Good luck.